Good evening, everybody. It's good to have you all with us here tonight as we continue through looking at encounters with Jesus. To my right, you will see the amazing Savvy Barbarian, Mr. Brian Carey. Good to have him with us as always. And to my left, Mr. Bill Rhodes, the knower of all, certainly a guru of historical fact. And certainly enjoy having him with us as well. But we're going to be focusing our efforts tonight in John chapter 9 and talking about this story, Bill, that, as you had described earlier, it's mostly narrative. There's not a lot of amazing dialogue that we necessarily may delve into, but there is a lot to look at in here as we talk about these encounters with Jesus. We've been looking at them more from the sense of Jesus encountering people who were sinners, meaning the lady at the well and those types of things. But today we're going to be looking at it not only from that side of it, which we do see that encounter, but also some more encounters with between Jesus and the leaders of the day.
Yeah, there are some interesting things here. As you noted, there's a lot of narrative, but there are a lot of things, a lot of questions that are raised in this passage. And we have been looking at the encounters of Jesus, and I'll tell you, they're fascinating. They vary a lot. We start with Nicodemus in John chapter 3 and the confusion that he felt. This was a powerful Jewish leader, the woman at the well in John 4. I mean, all of a sudden he's in Samaria where he's talking to this woman, and, this chance meetup, well, it wasn't chance at all. It was designed by God, of course. And then the feeding of the 5,000 in John chapter 6. The woman caught in adultery last week. I thought that was a great story for us to discuss. And his compassion on this woman who clearly had sinned, his compassion on her was just something that was inspiring. And really over the week I thought about it a lot, how amazing that was, how gentle he was with her despite her sin. The fact of the matter is we're all sinners, right? And then today the man born blind, and so I think this is going to be a really good discussion with this guy. It raises some questions, but it's one of those encounters in which Jesus again shines. And so that's what we are. That's what we are. That's what we are looking for. Now, in our sheet that we sent out, that we only put the first 12 verses. We're going to some degree, talk about the entire passage, but we're not going to read every word of it. He starts out with this healing, and then there's an encounter between the blind man and the Pharisees. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And later in the chapter, Jesus actually recontacts this blind man and ends the story there. And it's really rather fascinating.
Well, we're going to go ahead and start reading at least these first 12 verses tonight. I'm going to read out of my Bible, which is the New King James Version. It says, "Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, saying, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' Jesus answered, 'Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world.' When he had said these things," verse 6, "he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, 'Go wash in the pool of Siloam,'" which is translated sent. "So he went and washed and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, 'Is not this the one who sat and begged?' Some said, 'This is he.' Others said, 'He is like him.' He said, 'I am he.' Therefore they said to him, 'How were your eyes opened?' And he answered and said, 'A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received my sight.' And then they said to him, 'Where is he?' He said, 'I do not know.'" Always interesting to see when Jesus comes on the scene of all of these things, guys, that he often does things that you just don't expect him to do in general. No one would have thought, I imagine, that gentleman that is now able to see didn't expect him to make clay out of his saliva. didn't expect him to spit on the ground and make all that happen. Then suddenly, after he went and washed in this pool, Bill, that he would be able to see. And the way the scripture reads it to me, and maybe I'm wrong, it's like he can see like he never was blind. It's not like he was kind of blurry and he stumbled around for a while. Then immediately after he did what Jesus said, he was able to see.
Yeah, he was able to see clearly, and the very reality that he was born this way is significant in all of this. I mean, it's a unique event because of that. Jesus took all the initiative in this event. The blind man did not come to Jesus and ask to be healed. Jesus came to him, and still, expected the blind man to respond in faith. And I think that was the idea of washing in the pool of Siloam. Was that he was going to make him respond to him, that he was going to make him do something. I think one of the interesting things is that throughout Scripture, he does these miracles in different ways. It isn't always the same formula, so to speak, that he uses. And I think most of it, when he talks about him, he spat on the ground and made clay with his saliva. I don't think it had any great significance at all, except that that part of him touched this ground matter and made the mud kind of configuration that he put on his eyes, and ultimately he could see. Ultimately, it wasn't that. It wasn't washing in a pool of Siloam. The reality was, Brian, it was Jesus who did this.
Yeah, and I think you hit a great point earlier that this is one of the rare spots where this blind, I got to quit calling him the blind man. I'm going to call him Michael, just for the heck of it. He needs a name. So the blind man, Michael, he doesn't come up to the Savior and say, like some of the lepers, well, like, hey, come and heal me. He doesn't do that. It's just, I'm trying to imagine how this works, where he just looks like he's sitting there, or ambling down the road with his white tip cane and man about town, whatever his deal was, I don't really know. And next thing you know, he hears these people talking about a blind man. Well, they're probably talking about me. And the next thing you know, they're asking whose sin. Well, I've been called a sinner my whole life. I understand how this works. But then he hears some guy spitting. Like, are they spitting at me? Does he understand at this point? Maybe. But then some guy just slaps mud in his eyes, and he can't even see who it is. Yeah. This is almost unprecedented. I don't see anything quite like this, where Jesus just went out and grabbed somebody and healed him. This is this text goes on to reveal why this all happened. Yeah, it is unprecedented. There's no question about it. And the fact that he didn't ask for it. Many of the people that Jesus healed asked for it. Mm-hmm. They wanted to be healed. They believed that he was a healer. And here he takes a man who doesn't know who he is. He could have been anybody as far as he was concerned. A man who could not see, was blind from birth, and it's almost a view of humanity when you think about it. And as we go through it, we'll talk a little bit about this. But the reality is that everyone is blind until they meet Jesus. Right, and so you really kind of see that in this particular lesson. And this was going to be, by the way, a real lesson to his disciples. Because one of the things that happens right up front, it says, now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? I mean, that's really a fascinating question. Yes. I don't think I've ever asked that question of anyone. I've never believed, especially someone born blind. Now, if you were made blind later, I knew a young man who was made a paraplegic, actually a quadriplegic, later in life because he dove into a pool and broke his neck and all of that. And so you can say, well, he shouldn't have dove there. It was, he had something to do with what happened to him. But when someone is born blind this way, they have nothing to do whatsoever with what happened to him. And so the disciples were prone to ask, was it his fault? And there were actually ways that they believed that it could have been his fault.
Or was it his parents' fault? Whose fault was this?
It was a punishment.
It was a punishment, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead, Brian.
Well, I think that's fascinating because it doesn't even occur to them that there's any other possibility. It's obviously a punishment. Like Keith said, this is clearly a punishment for sin. So was it his or his parent? Like, they don't even. It doesn't even cross their mind that, I mean, this is so, and we see this a lot, I think, in the Jewish culture. They think, the rich young ruler, and you think, if you're well-to-do, then God must love you. You must be a good person, and if you're bad, then you're going to be cursed and you're going to be suffering these punishments. And we see, and I don't really think that that's necessarily unique to Israel. We can go back to the book of Job, which I think is actually before Noah, and go through that controversy another time. But that's the oldest book we have. And his three friends roll up to Job, and what do? Well, Job, you must have some dark secret sin that we don't know about. His youngest friend couldn't find anything. Well, we'll just accuse you of self-righteousness. It has to be something that you did, right?
Yeah.
You go to Eastern religions today, especially in India, where they have reincarnation. And if you're a bad guy, well, guess what? You're going to come back as a turtle or a tree or something, or a servant. If you're a good guy, maybe you'll come back as a noble or a religious leader or a monk or something more important. So like this concept that we all have as humanity that seems to be everywhere is that if you do something bad, you're immediately punished. And if you do something good, you're immediately rewarded. Is that the way we see God operates?
That's certainly the way that they saw it at that time. What I also find interesting about this gentleman, too, guys, is that even after he had put the mud on his face and he had to go and wash in the pool, and they asked him all these questions, and they said, "Who did this?" And he said, "A man named Jesus." And they asked where he was, and he said, "I don't know." I would have to tell you that this person had no concept of who Jesus was, period. He didn't know it was him standing there. He didn't understand what the importance was of him. He didn't know anything. He simply, based on the fact that he had been blind his whole life, and somebody said, "If you do this, you'll be able to see," he was willing to take the chance, not knowing anything based on what I'm reading. His tenor was, "I don't know this guy from Adam. I don't know him at all. But I'm gonna do what he asked me to do because
But he stuck mud in my eyes.
because he said that maybe I could see, and it was worth it to him to take the chance."
Yeah, it was, and it'll be really interesting later. He's going to make a statement that just kind of boils it down to the reality of it. Despite everything the Pharisees say. But I want to come back to something Brian said, and that is the Jewish people did believe that suffering and sin and all of that went hand in hand. If you had something desperately wrong with you, it means you had some great sin in life, and Job was a great example. In fact, Job starts out with these words: "There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and stayed away from evil." Now, that's there for a number of reasons, but the book of Job, a lot of people think it's about suffering. I knew a family one time who had lost two sons as adults, but rarely do you even find that kind of suffering. A lot of people have suffered, greatly. But Job is less about suffering than it is about this very idea that you get what you deserve. That if bad things are happening to you, you deserve it. If good things are happening to you, you deserve it. And they believe that he deserved it because he was a great man, an upright man, a man of great integrity. But as you mentioned, Brian, as we go through the text, and these were good friends, by the way. When they first came to Job, after they had heard all that he had lost, when they first came there, they sat with him for 7 days and did not speak a word. And the first one to open his mouth was Job himself. They did not say a word for 7 days. They loved this guy. They could not figure out what was going on. But ultimately, that is exactly what they believe. Let me read to you 7:18 and following. He says, "For you examine us every morning and test us every moment," talking to God. "Why don't you leave me alone, at least long enough for me to swallow? If I have sinned, what I have done to you, O watcher of all humanity, why make me a target? Am I a burden to you? Why not just forgive my sin and take away my guilt? For soon I will lie down in the dust and die. when you look for me, I will be gone. So this is Job actually talking to
Wow.
God about this. And Job has the same idea.
Right.
And so you see it all through Scripture, and you certainly see it here, that this man's blindness had something to do either with his own sin or his parents' sin. There's something wrong here that he was born blind. And so the reality is that when Jesus says to him, neither this man sinned or his parents. Now, he wasn't saying there was no sin, right? But what he was saying was that there was no sin that caused all of this to happen to him. This was truly a lesson for them. And I think it's one of the reasons why he chose to heal this guy, even though he didn't ask for it. He is sitting there. His disciples opened this situation up by asking about this man's sin or his parents' sin. And Jesus said, I'm going to show you, I'm going to give him something really, really good here. And I think that's what he did, Keith.
Yeah, when he says in here that neither this man or his that it was nothing that they did, he goes on to say in verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of this world. He also goes on, I believe, to say something to the effect of what happened here is to be looked at as a good thing, I guess is a way to say it. I can't remember exactly what he says in here. I'm trying to find it. I remember reading it, but I don't remember where I read it at.
You in John chapter 9?
Yes. Man, I cannot think of what it was. He said something. Never mind me. Just go on with the
in
lesson.
verse 3, where Jesus explains this happens so the power of God could be seen in him.
Yeah.
This is one of these rare spots, I think, that you point out that we actually get to see, because we don't usually get to understand the reason that bad things happen, and here we finally see that
Yes.
it's not about this guy.
Yes.
At all.
That's
It's
right.
like it's not about you, Keith. It's about me. You're like,
Yeah.
no.
I'm not okay with that. It's about me.
Exactly. That's how we operate. But this is not about it's not about this guy. It's about Jesus in this case. He's put here for a purpose, and this is one of those rare spots where we actually get to understand what happened.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And listeners, there's a certain, I think, messianic significance to all of this, by the way. I don't know of any time, and I could be wrong, I don't know of any other prophet, any other miracle, any other apostle that I can think of up to this point in time, and maybe ever, that restored the sight to the blind. I don't think this was lost on the Pharisees. I think they got that. I mean, when you look at this in this passage of Scripture, and we won't have time to talk about all of it, but I want you to listen to the terms that he's called. He's called, for example, he's called a rabbi in verse 2. He's called Jesus in verse 3. He's called the light of the world in verse 5. He's called the one who is sent from God in verse 7. He is from God in verse 16. Then he is a prophet in verse 17. Then he is called the Christ in verse 22, the Son of Man in verse 35, and then finally Lord later on in the chapter, I think 37 or something like that. And so you really see Jesus kind of laid out in this chapter with all the things that he is, and I think the Pharisees got the messianic idea here. I think the significance of it here, as they saw that he healed a man, born blind from birth. They did everything and they could to change this narrative. Right. They met with him. They met with his parents. They did everything they could to discredit the fact that this man had been blind, that he was the same man that was blind. I mean, they did everything to head this off because I think, Keith, they really saw the significance of that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. If you go down into verse 17, in the latter part of that, it says, the man replied, I think he must be a prophet. And the Jewish leaders say in 18, it says that they still refused to believe the man had been blind and could now see, so they called in his parents. They continued to look for a way to make their truth true. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier tonight. I was talking about it with Sean and Tyler, actually, that so often we find ourselves always trying to find a way to make what we believe the concrete truth.
Yeah.
And we fail all the time, really, to look at God's Word, Brian, and ultimately look for that truth, not look at it with a biased version of it for ourselves and how it may play out for me, but really, what is the truth that I'm reading here? And if I read it again tomorrow and it looks different to me, am I still looking for the truth, or am I going to subscribe to what I've always believed?
And this testimony that this guy has as we go through the chapter, the truth that actually happened, that he was blind and now he can see, and he has this encounter with Jesus. And as you're going through this, he doesn't, like you pointed out, he doesn't initially know that it was Jesus. He just knows, guy told me to do this. Like you said, I took a chance. Now I can see. And now he's got this story. He's got this epic story that's, you can see, as we're pointing out here, it's really winding up the Pharisees. It's winding up the local leaders. Their synagogue is on, everybody's all wound up about this. And he has got this story that he's got forever.
Yeah.
And you start to apply this to your life, this isn't just a Bible story that lives in a vacuum. How do I apply that to my life? How do I apply that in action? And there are times in your life when you have a testimony, something has happened to you, like something happened to this guy and it was amazing when he had this encounter with Jesus. And just because he didn't understand at the time what happened, why he was blind, he didn't understand, he didn't have all the details, but he's now able to share this story, and he's able to confound all the people around him just by stating what happened. So as I apply this to my life, I'm like, when I have that testimony, when I have a story, when Keith has a story, when somebody has a story to tell because you had an encounter with Jesus, it doesn't matter that we don't know every little bit or every little why or how exactly. Share your story, because look at what happens. This changed everything.
Yeah, he's still changing lives. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But, for example, in Psalm 146:8, the Lord opens the eyes of the blind. In Isaiah 35:5, when he comes, he will open the eyes of the blind and unplug the ears of the deaf. And it seems to be emblematic of exactly what he did to me and each of you and all that come to him. He opens the eyes of the blind. Isaiah 42, and we'll get there, but he finally says, I, the Lord, have called you to, or Isaiah 42, I should say, have called you to demonstrate my righteousness. I will take you by the hand and guard you. I will give you to my people, Israel, as a symbol of my covenant with them, and you will be a light to guide the nations. You will open the eyes of the blind. You will free the captives from prison. There, I think he's talking about it euphemistically. You will open the eyes of the blind. He's not talking about literally opening the eyes of someone who was born blind, but he's talking about opening the eyes of people who weren't able to see him, something we talked about in the on the radio program, Isaiah 59, Isaiah 59, 9 and 10. The NLT says, so there is no justice among us. We know nothing about right living. We look for light, but find only darkness. We look for bright skies, but walk in gloom. We grope like blind along a wall, feeling our way like people without eyes. Even at brightest noontime, we stumble as though it were dark. Among the living, we are like the dead. In John 8:12, Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness. And so you get this idea that the very concept of blindness is what he applies to all people who are not in him, who are not part of his family. And certainly that was this man. And so, I think the Pharisees knew. They knew those passages. They knew the Isaiah passage. They knew the Psalm passage. They knew that the Messiah was going to open the eyes of the blind. That's why they are so disturbed by this, and that's why they have such a desire to change the narrative. Well, it can't be what we think we just saw. And by the way, when you stop and think about it, they actually put their stamp of approval on what Christ did, or at least their awareness on what Christ did, by trying to say it couldn't have happened that way. You understand what I'm
Yes,
saying?
I do.
That's exactly what they did. They're showing that it did happen that way, and they're trying to change it, Keith.
Well, and so I'll ask this question to you and Brian. You can both, you're both much better historians than I. But as you're considering this idea of this Messiah, and they just didn't want to hear it, was it not that when they saw that the Messiah was returning, if he was here, weren't they expecting something amazing to happen for the Jewish people? I mean, why would they be afraid of that or not okay with it, or why would they find that a negative?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because if it wasn't for the preconceived ideas that they came to this with, I mean, Jesus fit the bill in every way. Matthew starts out talking about his genealogy. He came from the right family, and he just goes down really a list of things that all point to this one man. That's kind of what you do in a court of law.
Right.
You say, if you don't have DNA, long before DNA and all that, it was all circumstantial evidence, and you bring in each circumstance. You say, well, he fits this, he fits this, he fits this. Therefore, he's either the most unlucky person who's ever lived on the face of the earth, or
Right.
he's guilty, right?
Right.
And so that's kind of what you do. And so, if you look at all that the Old Testament says, Jesus fit it all. He fit the bill right down to where he was born, where he came from. All of that was foretold in the Old Testament. The problem that they had were their own preconceived ideas. They believed that they were right, that he was coming to set up a kingdom on earth. And then he came, and what did he do? He just kept teaching and teaching and teaching. You have Brian,
and he's hanging out with tax collectors and fishermen and sinners, prostitutes. Like,
Yeah.
what? This isn't.
He's supposed to be the greatest Pharisee of all times. He's supposed to be the greatest legalist that ever came into the world, right? And so you even have up to the week of his when he's going to be executed, you have all these people ushering him into Jerusalem and praising him, Hosanna. He is the King of Kings, and here he comes. Well, they think he is getting ready to set up that kingdom, overthrow Roman rule. But by the end of the week, these same people are calling for his execution. Why? Well, because he did what he's always been doing. He's teaching every single day, trying to put together the pieces of that puzzle so that they will see the Messiah for who he really is, Brian.
Yeah, he actually points that out. I think that's very early in the text here. He says, in verse 4, I must quickly carry out the task assigned to me by the one who sent us. Like Jesus knows he's on the clock. He's got to do certain things.
Yes.
He's got to touch all the.
Yes.
He's
There's
got
a time
mission.
frame here. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's one of those questions that I have is one of the things that primarily early on the Pharisees are accusing him of is he's breaking the Sabbath. So clearly he can't be the Messiah, or he wouldn't break the Sabbath.
Yes.
And so
good point.
I'm just want to throw that at you. Either one of you guys want to take this one. Did he actually break the Sabbath or not? And because they're using this, and you can kind of go either. I can kind of understand this in either direction. Like, he understands that men were made for the Sabbath and not the other way around. Or Sabbath was made for men. Men weren't made for the Sabbath. He's Lord of the Sabbath.
Yes.
So he can do whatever he wants to. You can say that.
Yes.
Or you could say, you know what I mean? So I mean, I kind of want you to break that down for us a little bit. Like, where do we, because this is their primary thing. They don't, early in the chapter, they don't disavow him because of the healing. They beat on him because he healed on the Sabbath, and making the mud and wiping it in the guy's eyes is work. So he worked on the Sabbath. And as you go through, you guys know there's at least 7 other occurrences of Jesus healing somebody on the Sabbath in the New Testament.
Yeah, it's amazing how many times he did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah,
he's
Go
poking
ahead,
people
man.
in the eye.
One of the things that I always look for in these texts, and it never shows up, is when he says Sabbath Shmabbeth. Because they're always looking at this like he's working on that day, like he's out tending these big fields with horses behind him and all that. I mean, it's the craziest thing I've ever heard, because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that what he's doing is good. What's even more interesting about that concept is they're complaining that he's doing something on the Sabbath at the same time trying to say he never did anything. How can you say that? He's a sinner. There's no way he could have done this. It had to be from God. Okay, well, God worked through a sinner. Does that make it better for you? I mean, there's a constant, they're constantly going back and forth on themselves, like in a big circle. They're chasing their own tail.
Oh, they really are. They really are. And I'll tell you something, Brian. I'm going to turn it over to you in a moment because you've done some study in this area. He never broke the law, period.
Right.
And so that means he never broke the Sabbath, God's Sabbath. In fact, I'll tell you that the clays in the eye and all of that, I think he did that for them.
Like he's pushing the envelope just a little bit to see.
I think he did that so they would have a reason to accuse him of violating the Sabbath, which he never, ever violated.
Right.
I think he did it for that reason. Now, you're a guy who has done a lot of study because you used to be involved a whole lot with the Old Testament and a group that believed, that's what we follow today and all of that. And so you've done a lot of study on man taking God's laws and making their own laws out of it. So I want you to talk a little bit about that.
The concept here, they do this repeatedly. You can really see, like as Jesus is trying to bring these concepts of grace and mercy to them, and they just don't want it. They want to, like I've done, and there's a certain ease of legalism too. Like I did what I was supposed to do, now you do what you're supposed to do, and there's some comfort in there. And the problem is that we can never actually do it. But I would equate this kind of to how a state or a federal Congress will pass a law, but then we get case law. It gets handed over to the courts. Now go deal with it. I made this law, and that's kind of what the Pharisees have done here. So God has made these laws like keep the Sabbath day. Don't work on this one day and pay attention to me. It's just remembrance from back in the book of Genesis.
It's very simple, isn't it?
Very easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is not a problem.
No.
But then the Pharisees will go, what exactly is work? How do we know? How do we know he's a witch? I'm going into Monty Python for no reason.
I'm with you right there.
It's like, how do we know this person worked? Well, we've got to create, and so they made this incredible litany of laws. Like, well, you can only travel so far, and you can only eat this much, and you can don't want you to prepare a meal because you can work hard preparing a meal, and you don't want. And the next thing you know, they've written far more than God ever has.
Well, it got so silly. I mean, you're right, and it got so silly that they decided to define. If a beggar comes to your house, can you feed him on the Sabbath?
Ugh.
Or if an animal gets stuck in the mud on the Sabbath, can you pull him out of the mud?
Right.
But the beggar thing always interested me because what they decided was that if he put his hands inside the door, you could put food in his hands. That was fine. But you could not put your hands outside the door to feed him because that was going to be a violation of the Sabbath.
Oh my goodness.
And so
they cheated their own laws.
Yes.
You guys, like the Sabbath day's journey, like they made up some arbitrary length. Like if you travel this far, that's not work. But if you travel farther than this arbitrary length,
one step farther,
and now that's working. We got to draw the line somewhere, and that's where we drew the line. So what they would do is on the preparation day on Friday, they would salt the place with meals. They would go put food here, and they put food over in that part of town, and food over in that part of town, so that they could, because I know that at the end of the Sabbath, I need to be over there.
Yes.
So I would walk this far, and then I would go eat this meal. Well, that ends my journey, and now I can go up to I can walk to my new meal as a new journey, and now I haven't broken the distance limitation. Like, you made up this rule, and now you're figuring out how to skirt your own, and that's how, it's that ridiculous when you start looking at what the Pharisees are doing to poor Michael here. Why are they doing this to this guy?
Well, yeah,
you're going to confuse everybody with that, giving him a name.
His name, because he's blind, right? Michael. He's Michael Caine.
I look at this and I think to myself, you get down to verse 27 where Michael says, "Look!" The man exclaimed, "I told you once, did you not listen? Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" He's
poking.
He's like, "Dude, I can see for the first time in my life, and you keep asking me the same stupid question. How about if you ask me what color your robe is so I can tell you how cool that is?"
Yeah.
Because, I actually can see it.
Yeah, but think about this, Keith, in terms of legalism. I mean, it's what a lot of people do even today.
Yes.
They decide that they're going to decide for everyone what God's laws are. If you have a law that God made, fine, but we're gonna define it. We're going to determine.
You can smoke and you cannot smoke.
Yes.
You can drink this much and no more. You can no dancing. That
Yes.
There's like all these.
Yes, and when you read the Sabbath law, I mean, you're right. It's a very simple law, and I'm going to tell you, I know what work is. And if God says to me, take a day off and don't work, I've got it, man. There's no problem with that.
It's not that
at
hard to
all.
figure
I
out.
love it. Yeah. And so what these guys did, and I read somewhere that they divided the Sabbath law into like 413. It was somewhere north of 400 individual laws that if you do any of those in the wrong way, you violated the Sabbath. When in fact, God never said that. Did he ever say you couldn't do good on the Sabbath? Did he ever say you couldn't heal on the Sabbath? Did he ever say you couldn't show mercy on the Sabbath? Did he ever say any of that?
And Jesus
so
is
the person
violating
who loves
those.
him, the person who loves him is going to keep exactly what he said. When it comes to work on the Sabbath, he isn't going to work. He isn't going to market anything. He isn't going to go out and make money. He's not going to do any of that. He's going to dedicate that day to God. And the whole reason for that, Keith, was that God wanted you, do what you want to for 6 days. If you're going to make money, you're going to earn money, you're going to sell your crops, you're going to, sell your, whatever you're going to do. But on the seventh day, you dedicate that to me. That was not for God. That was for them, so that they would take time to honor God and they would take time to remember who they are.
Yeah, but instead what they did was they looked for ways to change who they were. They
Yes.
kept adding extra and extra stuff to it so that the folks that were going to be writing those laws and making all of that stuff up, they became the most important. So suddenly God's not even in the picture. Now it's all about how many laws did you break and what do you owe me in your penance.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
And so Jesus is breaking those laws. He's breaking those suckers right and left. The
Yes.
stuff the Pharisees added,
Yeah.
that is nothing.
And
That
on
is nothing. That
purpose.
is, he's doing it on purpose to poke them in the eye a little bit.
Yes.
Because, like you said, I mean, he doesn't have to break off corn in the field right in front of people, or they
That's
can see
right.
him doing it. He doesn't have to do this mud trick. He can
That's
just
right.
speak it, and it could have worked.
Yes.
He's doing this to make a point that all these laws they've added this is basically corruption in his mind.
Yeah, if you listen to the text here, he said, therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. Now keep in mind, he's just healed somebody.
right.
This man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. And others said, and this is where it gets practical, right? I mean, if you're practical, this is how you've got to think. This is in verse 16. How can a man who is a sinner, and sinner in this text means what? It means a man who doesn't keep the law.
Doesn't keep the law.
How can a man who is a sinner do such signs? That's the practicality of it. Anyone with any common sense has got to say, how can a man do that? If he's not a man of God, how can he do that?
Yeah, they actually in the NLT it says, how could an ordinary sinner? Now they've separated out the idea of sinning. There's ordinary, there's extraordinary. We've got more craziness going on here
How
than
could
we know
just a
what.
garden variety sinner do this?
Yeah, this guy's just a normal guy sinning out there. I mean, how is that possible? So it is funny to me to see how Jesus creates this crazy, wagging the dog. I mean, he is just making them crazy right now.
It's like Ronald Reagan said. He said, "Facts are stubborn things," and that's where they're at right now. They're sitting here.
Yes.
They're trying to say he's not of God, but there's a certain problem in the room that this blind man can see now, and that is a stubborn fact they cannot deal with.
Yeah, that's just kind of in your face right there. And so he goes on to say in verse 18, but the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. And so they see him, and the guy says, yeah, I'm the guy that was blind from birth. Well, that's not good enough because, listen, for this to work for them, they have to prove that this guy was not born blind. This is not the guy.
That didn't happen.
This never happened. And so they called the parents of him who had received his sight, and they asked him, saying, is this your son, who you say was born blind, how then does he now see? Now, right there, you've defeated your own argument.
Yeah, every single time. And then when his parents look at him and go, "It is my son," I have no idea.
Yeah.
How this happened. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't ask for it. I didn't pay somebody to go do it. I
Yeah.
didn't, he wasn't traveling. We didn't take him anywhere outside of the city to go visit this, crazy person who rolls bones, or we didn't do any of that stuff. He just came to us and said he could see.
Yeah.
I just find that amazing that they continue that. Then they say in verse 28, they cursed him, being the man who was blind and now can see. "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know God spoke to Moses, but we don't even know where this man comes from."
Yeah.
So you're making these assertions that this person has to be this, but you have no clue who he is. Like, you're not willing to entertain. You're doing a great job looking for all of this evidence. You've compiled a lot of evidence basically in contrast to what you're looking for, but you're doing a good job of it. They were probably really good lawyers at
Yeah.
the time. They were able
Yeah.
to find a lot of information and a lot of evidence.
Yeah, they probably were, and the truth of the matter is he's making him look foolish.
Absolutely.
I mean,
He doesn't even have to be there.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And you realize that he's where this guy lives. He is among people who know him. This is not somebody that is unknown. His parents are there, of all things, and they're not going to lie about it. They're not going to say, "Well, it was actually some other guy. It really wasn't our son." This is their son, and so at every moment that the Pharisees are trying to really get him to, get people to see Jesus as something other than authentic, he turns the tables on them. And then they come to realize, we've got to take a different tact in all of this. So ultimately what they're going to do is they're going to kick the blind man out, the guy that was blind. They're going to kick him out and tell him to move on down the road someplace.
Yeah, what's funny is they go on and they go on before we get to that part, and they tell him you were born a total sinner.
Yeah.
You're totally a sinner. It feels like I'm in the 1980s and we're in the Valley Girl movie. You're totally a sinner. I mean, I didn't understand why they even felt like it was necessary to do that, other than they absolutely, Brian, would not accept what they were finding as the truth. And all the evidence that they continue to look for that points to the fact that Jesus is somebody different, not just an ordinary sinner. He's an extraordinary guy.
He's an extraordinary guy.
So
and they're pointing at the same evidence they're coming at this with the same concepts that the apostles did at the beginning of the chapter. They're saying, "You're a total sinner." Why are they saying that? Well, he's obviously a sinner because he's blind, right?
Yes.
This is the same question the apostles asked at the beginning. Is it his sin or is it his parents? Why is this a sinner?
Yeah.
So you can really see the contrast of the hearts. From they're both of these groups of men, the apostles and the Pharisees they both have this preconceived idea of you're a sinner, you're obviously instantly punished, or if something bad happens to you, you must have been a sinner, versus the other way around. But when Jesus is speaking to these two groups, you see a completely different heart, a completely different reception when they receive the
good point.
Which the whole irony of this story is Jesus, as Bill pointed out earlier. His job is to walk around and open the eyes of these people. And when he gets to the point where the Pharisees find out and Jesus says that about them, my goodness, are they offended at that?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, I think he does it just for them. I think it really is a kind of in your face. He didn't go around healing everybody that was blind, and there were other people who were blind, born blind, and such. But in this case, he does, and I think that is the very reasons. And so he says in this text, so they again called the man who was blind and said to him, this is from verse 24, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." They are stuck on that By the way, if he's the sinner, how do they see themselves? See, they see themselves in a way that
they know the law, Bill.
Yeah,
That's
it.
You're not catching on.
Yeah, that's it. But I love this. They said, "Give God the glory. We know that this man is a sinner." And even before that, he said, "Well, we follow Moses." Well, if you remember in chapter 8, that was the very issue right there. Was they were trying to pit Jesus against Moses,
right?
And you can't do that. But I love what he says here. And I think it's interesting. One of the things they try to do is they try to make him one of Christ's disciples. Well, you're one of his disciples. Well, he didn't know him from anybody.
That disqualifies you right there.
That disqualifies you, yeah. You've been made to see, but that'll disqualify you. And here's what he said, and I love this. He answered and said, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I know, that though I was blind, now I see. This guy only knows one thing.
Facts
and that
are
is,
stubborn things.
Moments ago he couldn't see, now he can see anything.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I can't imagine that this gentleman, Michael, we call him, I guess, according to Savvy here, he would have probably had the same thought process as everybody else in that town, right?
Yes.
That I was born blind, so
There's a reason
some kind
for
of
it.
sin,
Yeah.
right? Something happened either to myself or my
Yeah.
parents or
Yeah.
maybe their parents.
Just like Job.
But it was something, right?
Yes.
So they come to him and they make this statement to him, and he says, I don't know if he was a sinner, but I would have been thinking in my head, well, I guess I was forgiven. How do you fix that? How do you reconcile that, Mr. Pharisee?
That's a
Yeah.
great point.
That didn't get into that necessarily, but I would have thought
That's a
that
good
if I
point.
was the guy.
Yeah, that's a good
I
point.
guess I was forgiven. So what does that mean?
Yeah, if some sin caused this, I guess I've been, that's a really good
I
point.
give glory to God. You're right.
Yeah.
He forgave me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I go on seeing now?
Yeah.
I mean, how many times
Yeah.
do we have to have this same conversation?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And they do have that same conversation, Brian, all through this whole chapter. I mean, it's just like, you're just like, man, when are you going to get it? And they never do get it.
Not at all. At the very end of this, they remain blind, and they do it by choice. You know, they don't have the right to come to the conclusion that they came to. Like you guys pointed out, these guys are lawyers. They're logical thinkers. They're able to reconcile so much of the New Testament. They would destroy us in their knowledge of the legalities of how all this stuff worked in the Old Testament. And at the end of this, when they're seeing all these obvious signs that the Messiah is there, they're coming to the wrong conclusion, and they're doing it on purpose. There's no saving grace there to give to these guys if you're choosing wrong on purpose. I mean, the facts are stubborn things. This guy can
Yes.
see now.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
are you going to do?
Yeah.
You have to come to there's only one conclusion you can come to, guys, and so even the blind man, even Michael here, at the beginning he doesn't know who it is, so he says, well, this must have been a prophet. That must have been who it was. Like, he's smart enough to come to that conclusion.
Yes.
I don't know who this is,
Yeah.
but it must have been a prophet
Yeah,
because this happened.
He's grown in his understanding, hasn't he?
A little bit, yeah, he has,
Yeah.
and it's through his chapter. You can see even in this one chapter, his Christian walk takes some steps right here.
Yes. And you know, it's interesting from the standpoint that you see in this one chapter, and I'm sure all of this took a little bit of time, but you do see growth in this man. Plus you see honesty, which you never see in the Pharisees. You see integrity, which you never see in the Pharisees. And you see a man who, looks at it in a reasonable way, Keith, and comes to a conclusion.
Yeah, he goes on to say here, as we were reading in 28 and 29, that they are disciples of Moses, and we know God, and we don't know where this man comes from. He goes on to say in verse 30, in the New Living Translation, he says, "Why, that's very strange," the man replied. "He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he's ready to hear those who worship him and do his will. Ever since the world began, no one, to your point earlier, Bill, has been able to open the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he couldn't have done it."
Yeah.
Boom.
That's the only...
Drop the mic, and then he left.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yeah. Isn't that a great line? I mean, that's the only conclusion that a reasonable, rational person can reach. I've seen the books, by the way. When I teach people, one of the things that I highlight and spend a good bit of time with is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because I'm going to tell you that's everything. If that happened, then what we believe is true. If that didn't happen, I'm going to tell you that everything we believe and everything we're doing, including what we're doing right now, is an absolute waste of time.
It's all rubbish.
Even though there are some Christians who call themselves by the name of Christ who don't believe that, which just absolutely blows my mind. But I have seen the books where they try to get around the resurrection. by going to the biblical text, which they ultimately want to deny, they try to get around the resurrection in a lot of different ways. And I think that what they're really doing is lending their support to the very thing that they say that they're denying. The resurrection happened. Why do I believe that? Well, I believe that because there are a lot of people who saw it. I believe that because there is tremendous eyewitness testimony to it. I believe it because of what Christ did. Here we are 2,000 years later talking about a poor man who lived in, AD 30 and AD 33. A poor man who never went more than 150 miles from the place where he was born, who never commanded an army of any type, who never held a political office or even a high religious office of any sort, a man who should be unknown by everybody's standards, and yet he is known by people worldwide. Multi-millions and billions of people know this man's name, and you're telling me that's an accident. See, it's the thing that convinced me, and when I see people trying to get around it, I see the very thing that we see in these Pharisees.
This conspiracy concept that Jesus didn't really die, I mean, when you really think that through just a little bit, one, it's almost impossible to hold a conspiracy together with two people, let alone hundreds of people.
That's right, exactly
but what blows me away even more is that no man's going to die for a lie, not when he knows it's a lie. Now, if you can convince him that it's true, that's one thing. But, we see Jesus has appeared to, 500 people at one time? They knew it was him. They knew who it was. They knew Jesus. Yes. And many of them were martyred because they refused to recant that he was seen after his crucifixion.
Yes.
Nobody is going to die for what they know is a lie.
That's right.
I'm just like, okay, you got me. Yeah, it wasn't him. It wasn't. And they went to their graves and no, that was him.
Yes.
That's just.
Yeah. And the Jewish and Roman leadership of that day could have stopped it in a heartbeat. I mean, this is going to become, first of all, worldwide. It's going to be a pain in Rome's side. They're going to put Christians to death, right? All of them could have stopped this in its tracks. And I'm telling you, if they had done one thing, whatever we would be doing today, we would not be doing this. And the name of Jesus would not be known by anybody. All they had to do was to produce the body of Jesus Christ, put it in the town square in Jerusalem, and let everyone view him.
Done.
And I'm telling you, it was over. It was finished. It was done.
Right.
Had they done that, Keith, they couldn't do it. And it has spread across the centuries like wildfire and changed the lives of multi-millions of people.
Yeah, we find ourselves today with so many different opportunities for people to experience what they would term religion of some kind, right? Something spiritual that they feel is going to awaken them to what their true desires should be for this world that they live in. What is their real purpose and all of that? But the reality is that all of that is already borne out right here within Scripture, that we are constantly looking for that. But there are so many, as you pointed out earlier, Brian, with what's going on here, they've decided that they don't want to accept that. Now, for what reason, Bill, you asked earlier, I don't know why they don't want to accept that. What purpose is there? What benefit really is there to not?
To pin, they really want to pin this sinner thing on Jesus. As you're going through there, like, this is pivotal to their argument. Like, if we can just prove that this guy was a sinner, right? He healed on the Sabbath. That was wrong. That was terrible. Anything we can do, if we can just get him on this, that's the key. They think they got the golden ticket if they can just lay their hands on this. Yeah. How's that going to work out for them?
Not well. And of course, they're looking even at all that from a legalistic standpoint. Something the blind man says here, and then we'll kind of get down to the end and begin to wrap it up. But he said, "Now we know that God does not hear sinners." But if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he hears him. Now, he's relating that to Jesus, and I understand that. One of the things I want us to keep in mind is that God does hear sinners.
Yeah, amen,
now, they're defining sinners in a particular way, but even in defining it that way, he's wrong about that. But I want us to keep in mind, if you're studying with us, keep in mind that the blind man is not an inspired man. He's not the Apostle Paul. He's not Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. He's not Peter. He's not any of those people. He is uninspired, and the Bible often quotes uninspired people. It quotes them accurately, but that doesn't mean that what they say is accurate. And so I think this is inaccurate. We have, for example, Cornelius, who was not a child of God, but who was a man who gave money to the poor. He was a man who supported the Jewish faith. He was a man who prayed to God often, did a lot of good things. And his prayers came up before God. God heard this man's prayers. And so we want people to know, if there's anyone listening to us who is not a child of God, pray. We want you to pray. We want you getting closer to God and then ultimately becoming one of God's people. He does hear you. And I believe God does. Now, there may be some people God tunes out because they are so evil in their nature. But I'm telling you that if you go to God, God hears what you're saying. And I believe, Keith, that he'll bring someone to you who will help you understand the things of God much better.
Yeah, I think that God brings probably many people to us throughout our lives before we truly may understand him the way that we need to. I think that's the purpose of the assembly. I think that's the purpose of us having this Bible study tonight. I think it's the purpose of asking questions that we don't know the answers to, so that we can become really more aware of what God's purpose, what he has for our purpose in life. And as we talked about before, really the purpose of our life is to reveal this great mystery. And Jesus is here at this time with this blind man, healing him, beginning to reveal this great mystery to the people of that day who Brian, to your point, they're unwilling to see it. Mm-hmm. They don't want to see it. Jesus says at the end in verse 41, if you were, let me go back to 40, the Pharisees who were standing nearby, having heard him, what he had said, saying, "Are you saying that we're blind?" And he said, "If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty."
Yeah.
Let that sink in. If you were blind, you wouldn't be guilty. But he goes on to say, "But you remain guilty because you claim you can see." And it really is that concept, Brian, that we were talking about earlier. They just would not allow themselves to accept the truth. They so much wanted to believe what they had believed for hundreds and hundreds of years, and the writings of Moses and everything else. They chose to forget about everything else that they had read, from Isaiah, from people that were telling them that someone else is coming. They just were not willing to believe it.
I believe they really think at some level, I don't know if they thought it out this way or not, but I think they must have believed they had some exclusive lock on God. Like, you're going to have to come through us to get this figured out.
Yeah.
And those 413 laws on sin.
Oh, ouch. So much work. So much work. I mean, there were laws about apparently not swatting mosquitoes. And I mean, that was incredible.
And that's just one of God's laws. They did that
was
too. They
just
did it with
one.
others too. So,
but like Bill points out a moment ago, does God hear sinners? And we think of the most famous scripture in the whole Bible, right? John 3:16. For God so loved the world. It wasn't God so loved the few people that bowed and scraped and sought. No, it's not necessarily the people who sought him out. God loved the world so much, he sent his son to die for us. And when you really think of the magnitude of what that is, so the world is all in sin. There's nobody with salvation. Jesus comes and he brings that to a world filled with sin. We're all three of us here. We're all fathers, and you want to think, would you take your son? Like, who do you love enough? Like, Keith, I love you and all. You're a great guy, but am I going to let my son die for you? Or are you going to do this for me, Bill? At some level, the answer is, yeah, I love you, man. No, I'm not going to let my kid die.
No, that's
not going to happen. Let alone
I might
Jesus,
do that, but
Jesus is perfect, though. I mean, you have a perfect son, and you're going to let him die.
Yeah,
and it's because it's not for the good ones; it's for the sinners.
Yeah, when we were enemies, Romans 5, Christ died for us. Not when we were the good folks, when we were enemies. I love the way this ends, and we'll discuss this for just a moment, and we'll close out the class for tonight. But here's a line that really shows their arrogance in verse 34. They answered and said to him, "You were completely born in sins." This is what the Pharisees say to the blind man. Completely born in sins, and you are teaching us? And they cast him out. And so that's the arrogance of these guys. Who do you think you are telling us anything? Well, the only thing he told them was that I was blind and now I see, and this man did it. I mean, that's all he really told them, and they weren't willing to accept that. So Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when he had found him, so Jesus comes back to him, which is really interesting. He said to him, "Do you believe in the Son of God?" He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" This man still doesn't know.
He didn't see him.
He didn't really see him. No, this is the guy that healed me, but I don't know who he is. He answered and said, "Who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and it is he who is talking with you." Then he said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, "For judgment, I have come into the world, for those who do not see may see, and those who see may be made blind." Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Now, you know what the answer was supposed to be for that. And this is the verse you quoted. Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you say, 'We see, therefore your sin remains.'" You know, and it's really like that verse when he talks about, and again, he's talking about the Pharisees, those that are well have no need of a physician. And so it's really about the reality of seeing ourselves as we are. If you see yourself as being well, you have no need of a physician. If you believe that you have full knowledge and you can see, then you are still blind, and you'll always be blind. And that's what he's talking about here. I think the great thing about this, whoever wants to jump in, is the reality that this man at that instant became a believer in Jesus Christ.
He absolutely did. Go ahead.
I just, as I look at what he says back up here, and I'm just going to go back up a little bit, where he says in verse 30, "Why, that's very strange," the man replied. "He healed my eyes, and yet you don't know where he comes from. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he is ready to hear those who worship him and do his will." I believe, to an extent, that this constant hounding by the Pharisees, telling him that he's wrong, that this person's a terrible person, trying to take away the goodness of what has just happened to him. He's constantly hounded. It's like he's had no opportunity to just enjoy his sight. I mean, he's had to look at these people the whole time. He probably is thinking, "Just make me blind again. I'm tired of looking at these people." But here, as he's saying these words, I'm beginning to feel like he's starting to catch on a little bit. Like, you guys are really working hard and overtime to make this guy somebody he's not. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that, I've been begging my whole life. You guys have had everything you've ever wanted in your whole life, essentially. I'm thinking just, in the back of his head, there's something to this guy that you're not telling me and you're not willing to admit. And so as he gets to that point where Jesus comes back and returns and begins to talk to him, I think that's why the light bulb was so fast. I think it was bright. I think it was real bright that this is exactly why they don't want me to, because they don't want me to tell my friends who will tell their friends, because word of mouth is the best advertising, Bill, that we'll ever have in this world. When you can show other people by what's going on in your life that Jesus is real, that's where the mystery is revealed.
That's right. And as I think you said before, we have a story. All of us have a story, right? And I want you to think about this, Brian, as we get ready to close. This man believed he was a sinner. The Pharisees confirmed to him, even after he could see, that he was a sinner.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. And who was the one who said God doesn't hear sinners? He did. Mm-hmm. This man, to this point in time, has never believed that God would hear him.
Ouch.
Not one time in his life has he believed that God would hear him. All of a sudden, he's presented with a view of God, Brian, that really does matter. God hears even me.
We get people all the time, I think we talked a little bit about this last week. People have this concept that, like, well, when I get good enough, maybe I'll come to church. Like, I got to straighten some things out of my life first, and then I'll come to church. If I work on my language a little bit, I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to work on my language, but I intend to come to church at some point.
Yeah.
Like, it's in the back of their mind, but it's like, I'm not quite good enough, so God isn't going to really honor me. I shouldn't go to church. In the meantime, the devil has one job, and that is to waste all your time, because you know who you need to go to.
That's right.
You need to go to Jesus.
Excellent.
But I've got movies to watch. I got video games to play. I got work to be obsessed with. I've got medical, and I've got college bills for my kids. I got all this stuff going on right now. If I can just keep these guys' brains all wound up in all this stuff that doesn't matter as much as living forever, then maybe they won't come to these conclusions, but we study these scriptures, and these are here to apply to our lives. And we start to see that, like, once again, this guy, whether it's the woman caught in adultery, okay, we got you dead to rights, we know you're a sinner, or this guy who we believed he was a sinner, and I mean, he obviously had committed sins, but like from the point of view of you're blind because you're a sinner, he's innocent from that, then it doesn't matter. You're able to come to God. He comes to you, whether you don't come to church because you're perfect. You pointed out you come to church, you come to Jesus because you have sinned and you need salvation. It's completely the opposite. I think this is one of the devil's best con jobs that he's ever done, and he's done it to the American people at large, is to try to sell to us that we're not good enough to go to church. And just the opposite is true. You need to go to church and let God work on your heart. He can fix things that you will never fix in your entire life.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and even goes a step further than that. But he tries to convince you that all those people down at church, they're all just good people doing good stuff, and not one of them struggles with anything at all. And this
that
blind
a bunch
man,
of hypocrites.
and the woman in the last chapter, the woman caught in adultery, she was exactly the same way. She believed that these Pharisees, these people, were all kind of the perfect example of who godly people should be. And little did she know that Jesus is going to set them apart as some of the most ungodly people on the face of the earth. I think one of the things I like about this, Keith, and then we can wrap up here, but is the reality that he won't compromise with them. I mean, we find it so easy sometimes to compromise with the world. He absolutely will not compromise with these people. They would have compromised with him and say, yeah, we'll accept you, but you got to think kind of like we do. He would not compromise with them. And he stood toe-to-toe with them, face-to-face, and told them often exactly what they were. And in this case, he showed them what they were.
Yeah, he really didn't have any issues with offending them.
No,
in
not,
any way,
not
shape, or
whatsoever.
form. And what's always great about Christ is he doesn't offend them in the way that we might attack somebody. He offends them by pointing out their own nonsense.
Yes,
really is what he does, and he helps them to realize. Some of them, I think, in time begin to realize that. Certainly, Nicodemus was beginning to understand that there was something more to him than met the eye.
Yes.
And so if it was happening for him, it did happen for some others.
Yes.
But by and large, Brian, the leaders of that day, they were looking for ways to make it so that he wasn't who he was. And they just didn't want to accept it. They wanted to see it the way they saw it, in no other way.
Has to be their exclusive lock on God, and unfortunately, we see that. I think today that mentality, that Pharisaical mentality, lives on in certain church groups where certain church groups like to play no, we're the one true church, and if you don't believe exactly what we believe, then get out. And that's not the church you're looking for. That's I encourage people. I think this is a great church. You've been a fabulous mentor to me. Bill has been an incredible mentor to me, taught me so many things. And so I wish everybody could come here and love the things that I've experienced and that I've received, the blessings that I've received here. But I realize that everybody can't. So as they go out into the world, find yourself a church, look for somebody that's Jesus-centered, that's Bible-believing, and that's grace-based. You're going to be okay.
Yeah,
Couldn't have said it better myself. Keith,
I agree with that.
close us out, brother.
I'm going to let it go. Thanks for being with us tonight. We'll be back again next week on Wednesday. We'll have Bible Talk Live on Sunday morning. And so we hope to see you and spend more time with you. Thanks.